Andrew Berry had his end of the year press conference, and I got some reactions to it because he talked about Nick Chubb, Deshaun Watson, Joe Flacco, Kevin Stefanski, and a whole bunch more. So plenty to get to on today's show. But really quickly, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We're going to keep you guys in the loop all off season on the latest news and rumors. So help us reach our next little baby milestone, 33,150 subscribers. Now, let's get into the Browns rumors of today, which is Nick Chubb returning. Andrew Berry touched on Nick Chubb coming back during his presser today, and I'm going to give this one to Bernie heads right there. I think it's sort of in the middle of happening or not happening. So Berry was asked about where Chubb stands currently in terms of whether or not he's going to come back in 2024. And here's what Andrew Berry had to say as Zach Jackson tweeted this out. I understand that's a little bit of an elephant in the room. Nobody wants to see that carry in Pittsburgh be the last time he carries the ball for the Browns. There are things to work through, but we hope to have him on the team. Now, Jake Trotter also tweeted this adding on to this, saying, GM Andrew Berry said the intention is to bring running back Nick Chubb back for the 2024 season, despite the knee injury and contract situation. Now, watching the press conference in real time, Andrew Berry kind of gave me the impression of a GM that would love to have Nick Chubb back if it was a perfect world. But it's not a perfect world. And the reality is Nick Chubb underwent 2 knee surgeries. At his age and the amount of injuries he sustained on that knee, it's very worrisome. And then you toss in the fact that he's got a hefty cap hit for 2024, and that has to be something that plays a factor into this decision because he's got a near $16 million cap hit this upcoming season. The Browns are currently in the red, so they have got to find a way to trim some of the fat. And there are nearly $12 million in cap savings to be had if the Browns move on from Chubb before June 1st. That is simply a fact. It hurts our feelings because facts are not always your friends, but as much as I would love to see Nick Chubb, as much as I would love to see Batman run through the tunnel one more time, we do have to acknowledge the fact that an injury at that level, at his age, with this type of contract, those 3 things kind of form a Bermuda Triangle of we might not see Nick Chubb back in Cleveland again. And that's a tough pill to swallow because Nick Chubb over the last couple of seasons, I mean, even before he got hurt this year, he was still Nick Chubb averaging over 5 yards a pop, which the Browns could not buy a 5-yard gain for the last quarter of the season. But we do have to acknowledge the reality that Nick Chubb may not return in 2024. That's not super new information. But the way Andrew Berry spoke today, it made me uneasy. I think Andrew Berry came from a standpoint of we would love to have Nick Chubb back. What Nick Chubb did this offseason, during this season, Andrew Berry said he went from a 10 out of respect, 1 through 10, to a 20 out of 1 through 10. However, I think Andrew Berry is running a business, and that business is currently in the red, and Nick Chubb's prospect for returning next season, it's up in the air. I also think the way the way Andrew Berry somewhat commented on Chubb's rehab didn't really come across as Nick Chubb is way ahead in his rehab schedule. It was Nick Chubb went off his crutches during the Rams game, and that was really good progress, but I think the writing may be on the wall, and if the Browns can't figure out a way to either get good rehab injury news from Nick Chubb or get a new contract for him. Maybe they could extend him to lower his cap hit, but if you extend him, it better be for low guaranteed money because there's no guarantee Nick Chubb is going to play at a high level after that knee injury. So let me toss this question your way. Will Nick Chubb return in 2024? Yes or no? I'm old enough to remember that when Andrew Berry spoke to the media after the 2021 season in January of 2022, he was pretty confident that Baker Mayfield would be their starting quarterback. Fast forward a couple of months later, and Baker Mayfield is in Carolina, and Deshaun Watson's a Cleveland Brown. So what Andrew Berry says in January, don't put that in stone for what's going to happen in March and in April and the rest of the offseason, right? Andrew Berry, I don't think, is over the moon about doing these press conferences. He doesn't because he has to. He gives very candid answers, but he never goes into too much depth or detail on player or coaches' situations. And for Chubb, he was somewhat surface level. I think he tried to win the hearts over, saying, we'd love to have Chubb come back, but we understand that there is a contract and an injury to get through here, and they're going to work through those two things. But if those two things don't come out smelling like pretty roses, Nick Chubb may not be a Brown, and that sucks to say out loud. Let's move on to our next segment of today's show. Joe Flacco. Is Joe Flacco going to return in 2024? I'm going to give this one two Bernie heads as well. I don't think it's as likely as Nick Chubb. I'm not putting these two as an equal % chance of coming back. But the way Andrew Berry spoke about Joe Flacco today, he definitely seemed or sounded like a guy that would love to have Flacco back in this locker room in 2024. Now, I'm going to expand on that in just a moment, but today's sponsor is Factor. Thanks to Factor, I've had an absolute pleasure getting ahead on my New Year's resolutions, and I invite you to join along as well. Factor's ready-to-eat meal delivery service takes the stress out of meal planning, cooking, shopping, cleaning, all that stuff. Because with over 35 meals to choose from, including options like keto and calorie smart, you'll have a ton of nutritious and flavorful options to kickstart your resolutions. Stress less over meal times in the new year. Factor's no prep, no mess meals, free up time otherwise spent shopping, cooking, and cleanup. No more wasting time in the kitchen. Head to factormeals.com/BrownsChat50 and use code BrownsChat50 for 50% off. Once again, that's factormeals.com/BrownsChat50 along with code BrownsChat50 to get 50% off. Now, I love you guys, so I put all that information, because I know you don't memorize it, in the comments and description of today's video. Now, let's talk about Joe Flacco returning. He recently was on the Part of My Take podcast. He talked about how much he loved the Browns locker room, how much he believes in the direction this organization is headed. And Andrew Berry today spoke about Joe Flacco potentially returning in 2024, and he was more than open to it, right? He sounded like a guy that would love to have Joe Flacco come back. But he also understands that there are constraints to it. Berry on Flacco returning, here's what Zach Jackson tweeted out. I believe backup QB is really a top 30 position on the roster. We'd absolutely love to have Joe back. It depends. There are constraints. Would have no problem having Joe back. Says they will have 3 quarterbacks. Really too early to say how it looks. That was kind of a theme of Andrew Berry's press conference, was the media wanted to get answers about what's going to happen for sure over the next coming months, and Andrew Berry always pushed back with, it's really early in the process. We can't say anything definitively this early on, and that's pretty fair. Now, there is something to be said about how would that go over with Deshaun Watson, your $230 million quarterback, this locker room, this fan base. Like, could that be awkward having Joe Flacco return? Tony Grossi tweeted out GM Andrew Berry on possibility of division of locker room and fan base with Watson and Flacco. Zero consideration because of how the individuals are. It's not a concern at all. Andrew Berry was really quick to, I wouldn't just say brush past this question, but answer it directly, definitively, and move on. Now, the big question I have is, will Flacco take a cheap backup contract? Because Berry himself said or referenced Jacoby Brissett last offseason and how they would have loved to have Brissett back, but they can't afford to pay Brissett what Washington paid Brissett to be the Browns' surefire backup QB. So if Joe Flacco in free agency gets an offer for a 2-year, $12 million contract, the Browns already in the red probably can't swing a $6 million average backup QB deal, right? They paid Josh Dobbs last year to be their backup quarterback, and that was $2 million. So 3Xing that for Flacco, and similar to what Brissett got in Washington, is probably out of the Browns' pockets. However, if Flacco doesn't get a whole lot of interest in free agency because of his age, and he looks around, he goes, you know what? I had a great thing going in Cleveland. I'd love to come back, even if that's a backup role, which that's a big if, because I'm not sure if Flacco is on board to come back to the Browns. If when they meet with him, they tell him, by the way, like, there is no competition for the starting job. You're the backup quarterback, and unless Watson gets injured, you're going to remain the backup quarterback. And if Flacco goes, that's fine with me. I loved what we did in Cleveland this past season, and I want to continue to work and end my career here, then sure, bring it back. I mean, look what Flacco did this season. In half a year. In 5 games in the regular season, he put up 1,600 yards and 13 touchdowns. that's better than the whole Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback room. So if Joe Flacco is on board with a cheap backup contract role, and he's a pretty competitive and confident dude, so that may very well not sit with him, I'm sure Andrew Berry would love to have him back. But I think those are the constraints Andrew Berry was talking about. Now, let me toss this question your way. Who do you think is more likely to return? I'm actually really curious to see which one gets more votes, Joe Flacco or Nick Chubb. Get in the comment section and let me know which one you believe is more likely to return. Now, Andrew Berry also touched on Deshaun Watson's injury status, and he said Deshaun Watson was rehabbing very nicely. He didn't want to put his foot in his mouth and say Deshaun Watson is absolutely ahead of schedule, but he alluded towards Watson being ahead of schedule in his rehab process. He was very confident about Watson. The whole building has been very confident about Watson. They have to be. They have to go up and tell the media they believe in number 4. They're not backpedaling from their trade. They are standing by it. That was asked as well. So a lot of confidence in Berea right now surrounding Deshaun Watson, his return. They expect him to be ready to roll as soon as the spring rolls around. And they need that because Andrew Berry knows that 2024 is a huge season for Deshaun Watson and his future. Not even his future, because I think he's going to be in Cleveland in 2025, even if 2024 does not go super duper well. But in terms of success, a lot of it hinges on Watson because Andrew Berry in the press conference, they acknowledge if you want to go to the Super Bowl, you have to go through Patrick Mahomes. And if you have to go through Patrick Mahomes, well, there's only one quarterback that's beaten Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. And that's Tom Brady. Once in the AFC Championship game and once in the Super Bowl. So if it takes Tom Brady caliber play to take down Patrick Mahomes, you're going to need more than a really good defense and a good ground game to take down Mahomes and the Chiefs in the playoffs. You're going to need superstar quarterback play, and the Browns are going to need that from Watson next season. Now, as for the offensive coordinator position here, Andrew Berry was asked about that, but he did not like talking about coaching roles or anything pertaining to that. However, here's what he had to say on a new offensive coordinator. It won't necessarily have a connection to Deshaun Watson. Looking for the best people. He doesn't want to answer most coaching questions until the staff is complete. So if you were looking for a concrete answer on what the future holds for the coaching staff as to whether or not more changes might be made or whether or not they're going to bring in some familiarity for Deshaun Watson, you were not getting that answer out of AB today. Third segment on today's show. Kevin Stefanski going to get a contract extension. It's for Bernie heads. If Andrew Berry was speaking truthfully today and not doing his job as a GM to not put the cart in front of the horse, he would tell us Kevin Stefanski is going to get a contract extension. Now, Andrew Berry did not say definitively whether or not that's going to happen. Kind of a no word, mum's the word kind of deal on Stefanski getting a contract extension, but I believe it's going to happen. Andrew Berry was singing the high praises of Stefanski, talking about how much he has grown, how he's not even at his ceiling, and how this locker room did an unbelievable job fighting through the injuries, fighting through the hurdles and the resiliency and all that stuff. And Kevin Stefanski is the coach for the Cleveland Browns for hopefully more than just the foreseeable future. I have complete faith in Andrew Berry and his staff. I believe the Browns have the right guys at the wheel going in the right direction. I mean, this team won 11 games, could have won 12 if they went all out in Week 18, but, ball don't lie. The Browns are going in the right direction. And if you believe that the Browns are not because of the way the season ended, I'll reference what AB said today, which was you got to look at the whole body of work. It's really easy to get sucked into the last game as a final picture of what the entire 2023 Browns season looked like. But as AB put it today, he had P.J. Walker leading a go-ahead drive against the 49ers. The 49ers, who are in the NFC Championship game. You had P.J. Walker leading a comeback drive against the Indianapolis Colts on the road. You had Deshaun Watson leading a perfect second-half comeback win against the Baltimore Ravens. The Baltimore Ravens, who are in the AFC Championship game. You had Dorian Thompson-Robinson leading a comeback drive against the Pittsburgh Steelers in a game that the Steelers had won 100 out of 100 times before. And then you got Joe Flacco off the couch, taking this team to the playoffs. So, yeah, call me a simp, call me a sheep, but I believe that the Browns have the right people in the right spots, and there's always going to be personnel changes, and the 2023 Browns roster is not going to be the same as next year, and that team is going to go down as the 2023 Cleveland Browns, and it's not going to be the same team every single season. But when you got Joel Petonio and Wyatt Teller battling through injuries in a playoff game that the result is already decided in the second half, trailing by 30, but they want to be out there for their team, yeah, you better believe that they got the right people in the right spots. So if you believe in this Browns regime, like today's video, I want to show just some overall love right now to a lot of hard work has been done in Berea, and we saw some great successes this year because that Jets game, clinching a playoff spot at home, it does give you just a nice little, tip of what's to come here. Just the tip, right? The Browns are not just going to be celebrating clinching playoff games. They're going to be celebrating home playoff games soon. And that's how Andrew Berry opened up his press conference today, referencing the Detroit Lions, who for the longest time, like the Browns, were at the bottom of the barrel. And now they are one win away from going to the Super Bowl, and they've had 2 home games to show for this postseason. Now to wrap up, that's one last thing. Thank you. Reminder from my new producer. Sneak peek here. Andrew Berry talked about Myles Garrett winning Defensive Player of the Year, and he also referenced how Zadarius Smith might not have had the sacks this year, but in Berea, they really, really value pressures. So if you're looking for a sneak peek into what the Browns are looking for this offseason when it comes to free agency, don't get hung up on the sacks, right? Make sure to check out the pressures as well, because that also gives you a good idea. Hit spacebar again. There you go. That also gives you a good idea as to what the Browns look for. We got the new guy producing us for us today, and I think Colin's done a really good job. We had the intro play at the very end there, but that's okay. Colin, you want to pick a card? Unmute yourself.
I would love to pick a card.
Okay. Colin. Grade Colin's first time producing a Browns report. A, B, C, D, or F. I give it a solid A. Colin, which card do you want to go with?
I'm going to go with the 8 of diamonds.
8 of diamonds. I'm going to go with the 4 hearts. Oh, I dropped a card. Here we go. One last cut. 3 of diamonds. 2 of us were close. 4 and diamonds. Okay. That's going to do it for us on today's show. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe, and we'll see you all later.